Welcome back to Go Figure Customs YouTube channel for the third installment of Painting 101. It occurs to me that I did not put an introduction into the second one, and I may have actually not edited that as properly as I would have preferred. So hopefully that wasn't a mess. But in the first video, we talked about preparation and priming. The second video, we did washes. And in this third video, I'm going to talk about dry brushing. So let's get right into that.
All right, the wash is dry, so let's see if we can get a good view on that. Maybe if we get some more natural light in there. Probably not going to be able to see it too well on this. Oh man, sorry. Probably not going to be able to see the wash too well on this video. The lighting in here is obviously not the best. We're not doing studio lighting, and remember, we've added dark spaces, so the dark isn't going to show up too well to begin with in here. When I get done with this figure, I will take my normal pictures with a still camera and add them to this in some fashion, so you can see what it looks like. I'll take a picture of the original Joy Toy figure next to it, so you can see what it started as and then what it finished up as well. So the wash is dry. Now we're going to do the dry brushing. And so we're going to do Death World Forest first. So there's kind of two ways to, it probably needs to be shaken up a little bit. Two ways to do dry brushing. Get a little bit of paint on the brush, load the brush, let it set until it's almost dry, and then do your dry brushing. And that's the correct way to do it. Sometimes I don't have the patience for that. So what I do then is I load my brush, and then I'm going to move it around to really get the paint in my brush. Until most of the paint is almost gone. There's just a little bit left in there. Once there's just a little bit left in there, now I'm going to do swiping brush strokes down and across. So again, it's not a very controlled technique. We're just kind of slapping it on there. One of the things I'm going to do is wipe excess off with my thumb. So just or my finger too. So we've loaded the brush. Again, we're not worried about the vest yet because we're going to do that later. So you don't really have to worry about, I wish there was better lighting here. You don't really have to worry about the getting paint in areas that you don't want it, because we're gonna be doing the vest separately. You don't want too much paint in here, because then you'll start to paint over your start to get it in the crevices, and that's where your wash is. So remember, you're just trying to hit those raised surfaces and leave the paint in the wash in the crevices. So I load my brush, rub it on this figure stand until almost all the paint is gone. And then I'm just doing swiping motions and then wiping excess off. This is one of those things, as the same with the wash, you just kind of do it by eye and see what looks good. If it looks too built up, then you just wipe it off with your finger. And if it's not enough, then you add a little bit more. What you're trying to do is get contrast between dark areas and light areas. Again, the folds on the legs and the arms is where this is really going to look good at. Anything with a lot of texture is going to look nice. But you can see how simple this is. There's nothing to laying down a thin base coat. There's nothing to slopping on a layer of wash. There's nothing to making swiping motions with a lighter shade of paint. Doing just a little dry brush. The pitfalls of dry brushing is sometimes you see people, they'll dry brush too much on something. You want to blend is our goal here. We're trying to blend. We're not trying to make anything stick out. We're just getting contrast between light and dark areas. You're blending colors here. People really get carried away with dry brushing. I know I did when I first started doing it, because once you figure out how to do it, and it's not that hard, but it's a new technique if you've never done it before. So once you figure out something new, you're like, woo, let's go to town on this. Until you figure out, hey, maybe that was a bit too much. This is, like I said, this is a part I don't mind handling the figure, because some of this I do want to wipe off. Because again, we're blending colors, so if I blend it in with my finger, that's not a problem. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I don't know that the video is really going to be able to show it. Remember, this is all kind of subtle techniques here. And the photography that I'll do at the end of this will really show how well this really does actually look. This does look pretty nice. I'm happy with how this is coming out. I'm going to clean my brush out. You want the brush dry, obviously. So once you get one color out, you need to make sure that brush is really dry before you start on the next one. Okay, where I kind of slopped that dry brush on with that first layer, this is a much lighter color, so I'm going to use, a lot less of it. Because remember how I was saying people get a little too carried away with dry brushing sometimes, especially when you start to use a color that is significantly lighter than your base or your wash colors. That's when that really starts standing out, and if you do too much of it, then it's really noticeable. So I'm just going to use just a little bit. And load the brush. Wipe it off, wipe most of it off on this figure stem. And I think, you know, if you take the time and let it dry in the brush, there's a narrow window of when it's usable and then when it's too dry to do it. And once it gets just beyond that too dry, sometimes it'll still go on the figure, but it won't stay on the figure. And this is, I definitely like to blend it in with my fingers on these to kind of rub it in. But you can see it's not real, there's nothing to it. I mean, it's not that complex of a technique. It really isn't. What I do is not that difficult. It's just knowing a little bit about color theory, so how colors and contrast and stuff like that works, and then about just knowing how to put the paint on, and that's what this video tutorial is about. It's just how to do this. I need my cheaters here, make sure this is blending nicely how I want it in areas everywhere. No, not quite there. All right, and that's dry brushing. That's it. That's the green part of this figure is done. I'm not going to do anything else to this except my final step, which is just touch-ups when I get everything else done. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to doing accessories, or not accessories, but well, sort of accessories, I guess, because they are accessories. Plate carrier, pouches, and then kind of his boots, because we're going to do his boots pretty much the same color. So I'm going to pause it here, and when we come back, I'll have the colors that I need for that. All right, now it's time to do the vest. Again, the vest, the belt, the pads, and the holster, and possibly the boots. I'm not sure what color I want to do the boots just yet. So base coat first. Base coat is going to be Talarn sand. So we're gonna do a time lapse on that. The brush I'm switching to, for the like straps on the thigh pads, I'm switching to a smaller brush. This is why I hate, I don't know, so I'm using a 20-0 brush for the smaller areas. So let's switch to time lapse. All right, we've got the base coat laid down on for the accessories. I keep calling them accessories, I don't know why. On the plate carrier, the belt, the thigh rigs, holster, and I did the patch. They're not patches really, they're pockets. Pockets on his sleeves and pockets on his ankles. I'm still not sure what color I'm going to do the inserts of the pants. Thinking maybe a darker green than what I've used for the flight suit. I'm going to do a little research on clothes like this and see what color they normally are. A lot of times they're black, I think, but I don't want to use black on this. So I'm still torn between green, a darker green, and some sort of tan. I was a little bit more deliberate in painting, being careful, trying to color inside the lines, shall we say. But it happens. Probably can't see it, but there's a few errant brush strokes that got into the green, and that's fine. Bob Ross calls them happy little accidents. So, it doesn't have to be perfect, because the last step of this is we're going to go over and with a fine-tooth comb and find the little accidents like that and just touch them up. So it doesn't have to be perfect on the first go. I mean, that's one of the reasons I don't show a lot of my work in progress pictures once I've started painting. Is my halfway through the paint job, it looks like shit. It doesn't look like it's going to be a very interesting custom until it's all done. So this is I've done a couple of I've done something like this, a picture tutorial one time, and it kind of shows that these don't look very good in the while you're working on them. So the next step will be to do the wash and let that dry, and then do dry brushing. Now you might worry that your dry brushing, since you're using kind of wide strokes, that you're going to get some of your dry brushing into your green, because it's not a very controlled technique. But that's okay, since we're going to be using a light tan color. Light tan looks like dirt. So if we get just a little bit of dirt here on the uniform, that's not a problem. Oftentimes, greens like this, I've done 2 layers of dry brushing with lighter greens. A lot of time I'll do a second or a third dry brush in a tan over a green like this. And I may do that here anyway, because it adds a little bit of realism to it. You do it very, very sparingly, just enough that your eye just barely catches it. But that should be about it for the base coat there. Hopefully that time lapse wasn't too painful to watch. I am going to pause the video. It won't matter to you while you're watching it. And I'm going to go record another episode of General Geekery with my co-host JD Onesi. So I was going to record a podcast, so my co-host is not always on time, as it were. So we're going to go ahead and start working on the wash now. So same principle as before. kind of dabbing it in there, trying to get it in the creases, trying to avoid getting it into any of the green areas, and trying to avoid getting our fingers in it. So load the brush, dab it, load, and dab. Getting it in the crevices and creases of the sculpt. And that's what's really nice about nicely sculpted figures like these. Anything with a lot of detail, techniques like this just make things pop. It's one of the reasons I don't do like vintage G.I. Joe customs anymore. It's not that I don't like the figures, but these painting techniques don't translate over to those customs too well, to those figures too well, because the detail's just not there compared to these newer figures like Boss Fight and Marauder Task Force, and certainly the Joy Toy stuff. I suppose I could have done this time lapse too, but that's fine. Probably would have been like a 5-second clip. I'm not sure how well that time lapse stuff will work in general. So if you have some feedback, if you've watched the video, well, obviously you've watched the video this far if you're hearing me talk about this. Leave me some feedback on whether or not you liked that the time lapse parts in there. Although I don't know how many more tutorials like this that I'll need, because honestly, once you get the hang of this, there's not a lot else to it.
Hello there.
There's my co-host. He's just about ready. So I am going to pause it again as soon as I make sure my wash is how I want it. And then it's got to dry anyway, so I'm getting pretty liberal with the wash, but I want to make sure that it's not pooling up either, because if it pools up, then it doesn't look good. It's like we talked about the dry brushing. If you've just started doing that kind of technique, you can overdo it just a little bit. Oh, I think if you overdo it in the creases or in the deep crevices, it's not such a bad thing. As you can see, again, there's just really not much to this. Just dabbing it on and rubbing it in. Making sure not to get too much in one spot so it doesn't pool, but making sure that it covers everything. There really just isn't anything out that much to this. Other than some practice, obviously. One of the things I was going to mention about base coat again that I thought about while I was doing the time lapse on the vests was you want to get your base coat thick enough to cover your primer, but not thick enough to lose the detail of the sculpt. That's where you see people making mistakes, in my opinion, on your base coats and having it look like melted crayon. Is when you get too much on there and you start losing detail of the sculpt. If you start losing detail of the sculpt, get a little bit of water on your brush and to thin out your paint. And one dog's having a wiggle and the puppy's been wanting to play with her. She thinks it's playtime. Hi. No, everybody just chill. And my wife should be getting home any minute, and the dogs are going to go crazy about that, so hopefully the video will stop by the time the wife gets home. Brush, dab it on. All right, the puppy's up too, so I'm gonna definitely have to stop because she's gonna have to go outside and potty, so she does not potty in the house. Another little dab here on this pouch. It's a little thick. That's all right. On the shoulder patch or pouch on this side needs to be done. It's building up there. Gravity dependent area. That one didn't get done either. All right. That's it for a moment. We're going to let this dry for a while. I'm going to record my podcast, and then we'll come back and do some dry brushing.
Spoiler alert, did not record the podcast. Well, we did. Well, we did the podcast, but we didn't record it. Apparently, the software that I use for recording the podcast no longer works on my computer. That's why we're going to try and record the podcast using, I think it's Google Hangouts, and we're going to hopefully post it on this channel. But that's it for this video. Again, I'm trying to keep these to 30 minutes, and this is almost 30 minutes exactly. So stay tuned for the next episode, which should hopefully already be up by the time that you've watched this, where we talk about dry brushing on the vest. Thanks for watching, and tune in next time.